Clara loved her quiet Saturday mornings, the kind that started gently with sunlight spilling through the curtains and the soft hum of her washing machine filling the small apartment, a comforting background to the rhythm of folding warm laundry, each shirt, each towel, carefully smoothed and stacked as if the simple act could straighten out the tangled threads of her week. And today she was content to be alone, enjoying the rare stillness, thinking about small moments that usually went unnoticed, the way birds landed on the balcony, the distant laughter of children playing outside, the soft aroma of her coffee steaming on the kitchen counter, a simple day that felt safe, predictable, and entirely her own. Until a sound interrupted the calm, the faint click of her front door that made her pause mid-fold, her heart skipping a beat, the sound unusual enough to make her tense and alert, and then she heard it again, a voice soft, familiar, hesitant, saying her name, Clara, and in that instant, her mind raced to recognize it before her eyes found him, Daniel, the neighbor from across the street, the one she had noticed countless times from her window or on brief encounters while walking the dog or buying groceries, the man whose smile lingered longer in her thoughts than she had expected, whose presence now seemed both startling and comforting, and she found herself holding a sweater in her hands, frozen for a moment, unsure whether to set it down or run to greet him. Feeling a sudden mix of excitement and anxiety, and Daniel's expression mirrored her uncertainty, his eyes searching hers, nervous yet warm, a gentle smile tugging at the corners of his lips as if he had rehearsed these few words countless times but still feared he might fail. I just wanted to see you, he admitted softly, rubbing the back of his neck, a motion that made Clara's chest tighten in ways she didn't fully understand, and the familiarity of him standing there, slightly rumpled from his coat and a long day, made the quiet apartment feel charged with a new energy, the kind that only arrives when someone who has always been just on the periphery suddenly steps into your world, and she found herself blinking, trying to focus, telling herself to stay calm, to not overthink, to not read too much into this casual visit that somehow felt anything but casual, yet the small flutter in her stomach betrayed her, a reminder of the unspoken thoughts and stolen glances over weeks and months, of the conversations that had never gone beyond polite greetings and light neighborhood chatter, and now here he was, in her space, looking at her as if he had crossed some invisible boundary that neither had dared approach before, and Clara's voice trembled slightly as she asked, "What are you doing here?" hoping to sound neutral, ordinary, safe, even though her heart pounded with anticipation and curiosity, and Daniel's response was honest, open, almost apologetic, "I didn't plan to intrude. I wanted to see you," and the simplicity of his words carried a weight that neither could ignore, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings that had never been shared aloud, and Clara set the sweater down slowly, her hands brushing against the soft fabric as if grounding herself in something tangible to keep from floating away in the sudden intensity of the moment, the familiar scent of freshly laundered clothes mixing with the faint aroma of his cologne, a subtle, comforting presence that made her pulse race, and for a heartbeat, they simply stood there, eyes meeting, breaths almost synchronized, the apartment quiet except for the low hum of the washing machine and the distant city sounds outside, a world that seemed to pause just for them. And Clara realized in that silence how much she had imagined this moment, the way his eyes would meet hers, the sound of his voice close, and now that it was happening, she felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration, the kind that comes from standing on the edge of something unknown yet irresistibly inviting. And Daniel, sensing her hesitation, took a cautious step closer, though not too close, respecting the invisible boundary, and said, "I hope I'm not bothering you," with a softness that made her heart ache in the best way, the tenderness in his tone making the ordinary apartment feel suddenly like the most intimate place in the world, and Clara's lips curved into a small, shy smile, the kind that comes from a sudden awareness of shared understanding, the kind that can turn a simple day into something memorable before anything has even been said, and she gestured toward the living room, an invitation that was both casual and deliberate. "Okay, come in," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, leading him past the neatly folded piles of laundry. The room bathed in warm morning light that caught the dust motes floating lazily in the air, and as they settled on the sofa, careful not to disturb the small harmony of the space she had curated for her solitary mornings, Clara felt a strange sense of rightness, the quiet intimacy of a shared space making her feel seen in ways she hadn't expected, and Daniel, settling opposite her yet angled just enough that their knees nearly touched, smiled, a small, tentative smile that carried relief and hope. And for a while, they spoke in easy tones, starting with the mundane, commenting on the weather, joking about the neighbor's dog that always barked at the same time every morning, and sharing small, ordinary anecdotes that, under different circumstances, might have felt trivial but now seemed like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together, each laugh, each glance, each small movement carrying a subtle, unspoken tension, the kind that makes hearts beat faster even in the quietest moments. And Clara noticed how effortlessly she was drawn into the conversation, how natural it felt to laugh and listen, how her earlier thoughts of solitude seemed distant and unimportant. And as Daniel spoke about something minor, a funny incident at the corner cafe, the way his eyes lit up, the slight tilt of his head, the careful choice of words, Clara felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a tenderness she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, a quiet recognition of connection. And in that moment, folding laundry, a task she had done countless times with mundane repetition, became a backdrop to a scene that felt electric with possibility, a space where hearts could meet without the noise and chaos of the outside world. And Clara realized that something had shifted, subtly but irrevocably, the rhythm of her morning no longer dictated by machines or schedules but by the soft cadence of Daniel's voice, the gentle warmth of his presence, and the tiny sparks of anticipation dancing silently between them, a quiet promise that this simple day, so ordinary just moments ago, had already become unforgettable. And as they continued to talk, sharing thoughts that had never been voiced aloud, Clara understood that life sometimes sneaks up in small, delicate ways, weaving the mundane with the extraordinary, turning even the act of folding laundry into a memory that would linger long after the sun had set, long after the quiet apartment had returned to stillness, a beginning she hadn't expected but now felt ready to embrace, the kind of moment that changes everything without demanding it. And as the morning stretched on, the laundry forgotten for now, Clara and Daniel sat together, two hearts quietly recognizing something they had both been missing, something neither had dared to name, but which now existed between them like a fragile, beautiful thread, connecting one soul to another in a way that promised more, a story just beginning. A day that started simple and ordinary, now impossible to forget. After the initial surprise of Daniel's visit faded, Clara felt a mix of curiosity, nervousness, and excitement swirling inside her as they both settled on the sofa, the apartment now feeling smaller yet warmer, as if the room itself had shifted to accommodate the presence of someone who had long lingered at the edges of her thoughts. And for a while, they simply sat, neither speaking, the quiet stretching between them in a way that was both comforting and charged, the hum of the washing machine in the background sounding like the heartbeat of the space around them. And Clara's mind raced through memories she hadn't touched in months, small moments when she had caught herself glancing across the street to see him, or smiled at his casual wave, or felt an unexplainable warmth at the sound of his laughter that seemed to follow him like a gentle echo. And now he was here, and the reality of it made her feel exposed, alive, and tender all at once, while Daniel, equally aware of the delicate nature of the encounter, seemed to measure every word, every gesture, as if afraid to break the invisible thread connecting them. And finally, he leaned back slightly and spoke, breaking the silence with words that were casual yet carried the weight of meaning. "I didn't know you were home. I thought, maybe we could talk." And Clara nodded, her throat tight, unable to articulate the jumble of emotions, yet knowing instinctively that she wanted to listen, wanted to stay, and wanted to let herself feel what had been quietly growing between them for months, the kind of quiet longing that often goes unnoticed until it's suddenly undeniable. And so they began with small talk, the surface of conversation safe and familiar, discussing the morning, commenting on the soft sunlight, the way the air felt through the open window, sharing laughs over trivial neighborhood happenings, the way Mrs. Carter's cat always seemed to patrol the sidewalk at the same time each day. And Daniel's laughter made Clara's chest feel lighter, almost fluttery, a sensation she hadn't realized she missed so deeply, the ordinary details taking on a sudden importance because they were shared, because in them, she recognized his attention, his presence, and a care that was both subtle and profound. And as the minutes turned to an hour, their conversation drifted naturally into deeper territories, the first words tentative, almost shy, about past disappointments, lost opportunities, and the loneliness that sometimes lingered even amidst the busyness of life, and Clara felt herself drawn to his honesty, the way he spoke without pretense, the way his eyes softened when he recounted moments of regret or longing, and she realized that this was someone who carried both strength and vulnerability. Someone who could reflect the quiet ache she often kept hidden from the world, someone who could see her without judgment, without expectation, and the intensity of that realization made her stomach tighten in the most unexpected way, a mixture of excitement and fear, and Daniel, noticing her gaze, smiled faintly, a small, knowing gesture that seemed to acknowledge the unspoken connection between them, and Clara, despite her initial hesitation, felt herself leaning in just slightly, the physical space between them shrinking in a way that mirrored the emotional closeness developing without words, and their hands brushed lightly as she adjusted a cushion, a moment so brief yet charged with warmth, a spark neither could ignore, a silent confession of feelings that had been waiting for the right time to surface, and Clara caught herself imagining what it would feel like to touch his hand intentionally, to hold it, to see if the warmth of his presence could fill the empty corners of her heart, and she realized that in this simple setting, an ordinary Saturday, a sofa, the scent of folded laundry and faint traces of coffee, something extraordinary was unfolding. A connection that didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations to exist, only the quiet acknowledgement of being seen, of being heard, of being recognized in ways that mattered, and Daniel's voice, soft but deliberate, continued to guide the conversation, exploring the nuances of life, the dreams that had been shelved, the fears that had never been spoken, and Clara found herself sharing thoughts she rarely shared aloud, the kind of confessions that made her feel vulnerable yet liberated, and he listened with a patience and attentiveness that made her heart ache with relief and hope, and as the sun climbed higher, casting patterns of light across the room, their laughter mingled with sighs and contemplative pauses, creating a rhythm that was at once intimate and familiar, a dance of words and silences that neither wanted to end, a bridge between two lives that had brushed past each other for too long. And Clara realized that the way her chest lifted when he smiled, the way her fingers tingled after their brief touches, the way the air between them seemed heavier with unspoken meaning, all indicated that this was more than a chance encounter, that the ordinary world outside had little relevance in this moment, that they existed in a bubble of time where emotions were heightened, delicate, and incredibly real, and Daniel, too, seemed aware. His glances lingering, the slight tilt of his head, the careful modulation of his voice, all speaking volumes, revealing the depth of feeling he had carried silently, and Clara felt a warmth, a fluttering that made her smile without realizing it, a quiet acknowledgement that the distance between longing and fulfillment was narrowing, and she wanted to reach for it, to grasp it, to see where this fragile thread of connection could lead, even as a small part of her worried about what came next, what implications his visit held, what this moment meant in the larger scope of their lives, yet the fear was tempered by the undeniable pleasure of simply being present, simply existing alongside someone who saw her in her entirety, who didn't rush, who didn't demand, who allowed the silence to speak as loudly as words, and as Daniel recounted a memory from the neighborhood festival, the way he described the chaos with humor, the way his eyes softened when he mentioned a quiet moment he had observed from afar, Clara felt her pulse quicken, realizing that this was the first time in a long time she had been fully present with someone, fully seen, fully understood, and the realization brought tears to her eyes, a combination of gratitude, longing, and unexpected joy, and when Daniel reached out instinctively to brush a stray lock of hair from her face, the gesture was fleeting, delicate, and yet it carried more intimacy than anything they had done before, and Clara's breath caught the small touch, igniting a warmth that spread through her, leaving her both vulnerable and exhilarated, and for a moment, time seemed to slow, the apartment fading around them, leaving only the quiet pulse of two hearts sinking in recognition, a shared understanding of connection that neither had dared name but both felt deeply, and in that soft, charged space, the simple act of sitting together on a sofa, talking, laughing, and occasionally pausing to take in each other's presence, became a profound experience, a turning point where the mundane, the laundry, the sunlight, the hum of machines, merged with the extraordinary, the unexpected, and the unforgettable, and Clara realized that the way her fingers brushed his accidentally, the way her gaze lingered slightly longer than necessary, the way her chest tightened and softened in rapid succession, were all signs of a bond that was forming quietly but resolutely, a bond that promised tenderness, connection, and the subtle thrill of romance. And as they continued to speak, the conversation flowing effortlessly from light humor to reflections on their past, hopes for the future, and the small, intimate confessions of what it felt like to be alone yet longing for someone to truly notice them, Clara felt herself relax into the moment, letting go of the careful walls she had built around her heart, letting herself experience the raw, beautiful vulnerability of being seen, while Daniel's steady presence, his patience, his attentiveness, made her feel safe enough to do so. And as the hours passed unnoticed, the sun shifting across the room, shadows moving gently across the walls, they both recognized a subtle, unspoken shift, a change that had begun with small words and tiny gestures but now felt undeniable, a quiet acknowledgement that what had started as an ordinary day, a day that could have been as mundane as any other, had transformed into something deeply emotional, intimate, and utterly unforgettable. And in that shared silence, broken only by the occasional laugh or sigh, Clara and Daniel realized that the space between them was no longer measured by proximity or polite distance, but by the fragile, tender, and thrilling connection that had quietly grown into a presence neither could ignore, a connection that promised more, that hinted at possibility, that made the ordinary apartment, the sofa, the folded laundry, and the soft light of the morning feel like sacred witnesses to the beginning of something rare, precious, and profoundly moving. And as Clara glanced at Daniel, feeling the warmth of his presence radiate toward her, she understood that sometimes the most extraordinary moments come quietly, in the hum of a washing machine, in shared laughter, in fleeting touches, in the simple courage of two hearts daring to meet, and in that quiet recognition, that subtle, almost imperceptible understanding. Clara felt her soul stir, her chest lift, her heart ache and expand all at once, knowing that this moment, this conversation, this shared space, would linger long after the day ended, long after the apartment returned to stillness, long after the laundry was folded and put away, a delicate, emotional thread weaving their lives together in ways they were only beginning to understand, a thread that promised tenderness, romance, and the subtle drama of hearts meeting, hearts acknowledging, hearts awakening. And as the sunlight bathed the room in golden warmth, Clara realized that life, in its quiet, ordinary way, had given her a gift, a moment that would remain etched in memory, a connection that had been waiting patiently for the courage to be recognized. And as they continued to talk, each word, each glance, each small, gentle movement became part of a tapestry of emotion, a story unfolding naturally, beautifully, powerfully. And Clara understood, with a soft, almost trembling certainty, that this day, simple, quiet, mundane at first glance, had become the beginning of something unforgettable, a memory that would linger in her heart, delicate and profound. As she and Daniel sat together, two souls meeting in a way that felt both magical and real, ordinary and extraordinary, gentle and deeply moving, the kind of moment that makes life worth noticing, worth remembering, worth living fully. As the afternoon settled into a softer light, the room felt different, heavier with meaning, and Clara sensed a shift the moment Daniel fell quiet, his easy smile fading into a thoughtful stillness as if he were gathering courage that had been scattered across years of hesitation. And she noticed how his fingers traced the edge of the cushion, how his breath slowed, how his eyes held hers longer than before, not with uncertainty but with intention, and the silence between them no longer felt comfortable but necessary, like the pause before a truth finally steps into the open. And Clara's heart beat faster, not from fear but from recognition, a quiet knowing that whatever came next would change the shape of this day forever. And when Daniel finally spoke, his voice was calm, yet layered with emotion. "There's something I've wanted to say for a long time," and the words landed gently but firmly, sending a wave of warmth and nervous anticipation through her, and she nodded without speaking, afraid that any sound might break the fragile moment. And Daniel leaned forward slightly, his posture open, his eyes steady, and began to speak not with dramatic flair but with honesty that felt raw and sincere, explaining how he had noticed her long before she ever noticed him. How her quiet routines, her kindness to strangers, the way she laughed softly to herself on her balcony had drawn him in without effort, and Clara felt her chest tighten as she realized how often she had unknowingly been seen, how many moments she thought invisible had mattered to someone else. And Daniel continued, sharing how he had stood across the street countless evenings, watching her light turn on, wondering what her life was like, wondering if she ever felt the same loneliness he carried despite being surrounded by people, and Clara listened, stunned, her thoughts racing through. Memories now redefined by his words, moments that once seemed ordinary now glowing with meaning, and as Daniel spoke, he admitted his fear of speaking up, of ruining something that felt delicate and unspoken, of crossing a line that could not be uncrossed, and his honesty disarmed her completely, making her feel both exposed and deeply understood, and when he finally said, "Seeing you today, here, like this, made me realize I can't keep pretending these feelings don't exist," Clara felt tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming tenderness of being chosen, of being seen without performance or expectation, and she reached for his hand without thinking, her fingers brushing his skin, grounding herself in the reality of the moment, and Daniel's breath caught at the contact, his thumb curling gently around her fingers as if seeking reassurance, and the touch sent a quiet warmth through her, steady and comforting, and for a brief moment, the world narrowed to that simple connection, two hands meeting, two hearts finally acknowledging what had been growing silently between them, and Clara found her voice, soft but steady, telling him how she, too, had noticed him, how his presence had lingered in her thoughts in ways she hadn't allowed herself to explore, how she had dismissed her feelings as imagination, as coincidence, as something safer than hope, and Daniel listened with an intensity that made her feel cherished, his eyes never leaving hers, his expression open and vulnerable, and as she spoke, Clara felt years of guardedness begin to loosen, replaced by a sense of possibility that felt both thrilling and terrifying, and when she finished, the silence that followed was not empty but full, charged with shared understanding, and Daniel smiled then, not the polite smile of a neighbor but a genuine one, warm and relieved, and he said her name in a way that made it feel new, and Clara felt her heart swell at the sound, and they sat there, hands still joined, breathing in the quiet, letting the weight of their confession settle, and the room seemed to glow with a softness that had nothing to do with sunlight, a warmth created by honesty and courage, and Clara noticed how close they were now, how the distance between them had disappeared without either of them moving deliberately, and she became acutely aware of every detail, the sound of his breathing, the faint crease in his brow, the way his presence felt steady and grounding. And she wondered how she had lived so long without this feeling, this simple yet profound sense of connection, and Daniel spoke again, his voice lower, more intimate, saying he didn't expect answers or promises, only truth, and Clara appreciated the care in his words, the respect he showed for her space and feelings, and she told him she needed time to understand what this meant, not because she doubted him but because the depth of the moment deserved reflection, and Daniel nodded, accepting her honesty without pressure, and that acceptance touched her deeply, making her feel safe in ways she hadn't anticipated, and just as the moment seemed to settle into something calm and assured, a sharp sound cut through the room, breaking the fragile bubble they had created, Clara's phone vibrating insistently on the table, the screen lighting up with a name that pulled her abruptly back into the world beyond the apartment, and she hesitated, torn between ignoring it and answering, and Daniel noticed the shift immediately, his expression changing to concern mixed with understanding, and Clara excused herself softly, her heart heavy with the interruption even as she knew it couldn't be avoided, and when she answered, her voice was careful, her responses brief, the conversation on the other end urgent but distant, and with every second, she felt the moment slipping, not disappearing but changing, and when the call finally ended, the room felt quieter, the intensity slightly dimmed though not erased, and Clara returned to the sofa, apologizing, her voice tinged with regret, and Daniel smiled gently, telling her it was okay, that life didn't pause just because hearts were opening, and his calm response eased her guilt, reminding her that what they had shared was real enough to withstand interruption. And they sat together again, not touching now but close, the space between them filled with everything that had been said and everything still unsaid, and Clara felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her, excitement, fear, hope, and a quiet sadness that the moment couldn't stretch on forever, and Daniel seemed to sense her thoughts, speaking softly about timing, about how some things arrive when we least expect them, and how courage often comes in ordinary moments, and Clara nodded, understanding that this day had already changed her, that the simplicity of folding laundry had given way to something far deeper, and as they stood eventually, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the room, Clara realized that even if nothing more happened today, even if life pulled them in different directions tomorrow, this moment would remain, etched into her memory with clarity and warmth, a reminder that connection can arrive quietly, without warning, and leave a mark that doesn't fade. And Daniel lingered by the door, their conversation lighter now but still charged with meaning, and before leaving, he paused, looking at her with a tenderness that made her chest ache, and said, "I'm glad I came today," and Clara smiled, feeling the truth of it settle deep within her. And when the door closed behind him, the apartment returned to stillness, the folded laundry waiting patiently where it had been left, the washing machine silent now, and Clara stood there for a long moment, absorbing everything that had happened, her heart full, her thoughts racing, knowing that this day, this quiet, unexpected confession, had shifted something inside her permanently. And as she finally moved, picking up a shirt and smoothing it absent-mindedly, she understood that life had a way of hiding its most powerful moments inside the simplest routines, and that today, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, she had stepped into a story she would never forget. One defined not by grand gestures but by honesty, courage, and the quiet meeting of two hearts finally brave enough to speak. The apartment felt different after Daniel left, not empty but charged with meaning, and Clara stood still for a long moment, listening to the quiet settle back into place, the hum of the city outside returning softly as if nothing had changed, yet everything inside her had, and she moved slowly, picking up a shirt from the couch, folding it without focus, her thoughts circling the afternoon like waves that refused to calm, replaying his words, his voice, the steady honesty in his eyes, and she felt both light and heavy at once, the kind of feeling that comes when something true has been spoken after a long silence. And as she finished the laundry, her hands worked automatically while her heart stayed somewhere else, lingering in that space between hope and fear, wondering what came next, knowing there was no turning back to the quiet distance that had existed before. And when the sun dipped lower, painting the room in soft orange light, Clara made herself tea and sat by the window, watching the street below, half expecting to see Daniel cross back into view, but the street remained ordinary, neighbors passing, cars slowing, life continuing as it always had, and that realization grounded her, reminding her that what had happened was real precisely because it fit into life without spectacle. And as evening approached, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message that made her breath catch, a simple note from Daniel saying he hoped she was okay, that he hadn't meant to overwhelm her, that he just wanted her to know how much the day meant to him. And Clara stared at the screen, her fingers hovering before she replied, choosing her words carefully, wanting honesty without pressure, and she wrote back that she was glad he came, that she needed time to let everything settle, but that she felt something real and didn't want to pretend otherwise. And the response came quickly, warm and understanding, telling her there was no rush, only gratitude, and that patience had always been his strength when it came to things that mattered. And Clara smiled softly, feeling a quiet relief wash through her, knowing she wasn't alone in her uncertainty. And that night, sleep came slowly, her mind drifting through memories of small moments she had once dismissed, now illuminated by new understanding. And when morning arrived, she woke with a strange sense of calm, as if the emotional storm had passed and left clarity behind, and she went about her day differently, noticing things she usually rushed past, the sound of her footsteps, the feel of sunlight on her skin, the simple beauty of routine. And when she stepped outside later that afternoon, she saw Daniel across the street, talking to someone, and when his eyes met hers, he smiled, not wide or dramatic, just steady and sincere, and that small exchange felt like a promise. And over the next few days, their connection unfolded gently, without urgency, messages exchanged thoughtfully, brief conversations shared in passing, each interaction layered with respect and warmth. And Clara found herself opening up in small ways, sharing parts of herself she had kept guarded, while Daniel met her openness with patience and care. And one evening, as they walked together after sunset, talking about nothing and everything, Clara realized how natural it felt, how the uncertainty that once scared her had softened into trust, and she understood that love, or whatever this was becoming, didn't always arrive with certainty. Sometimes it grew quietly, built on moments of choice and understanding. And as weeks passed, the memory of that afternoon folding laundry remained vivid, not because of what happened physically but because of what shifted. Emotionally, the courage to speak, to listen, to meet someone honestly, and Clara knew that even if the future held challenges, even if paths twisted in unexpected ways, she would carry that day with her. A reminder that life could surprise her in the middle of the ordinary, that connection didn't require perfect timing, only willingness. And one quiet evening, as she and Daniel sat together, comfortable in shared silence, she realized the unforgettable moment wasn't confined to that single afternoon. It was the beginning of a series of moments shaped by honesty, patience, and mutual care, and she felt grateful, not just for him, but for herself, for staying open, for allowing something new to enter her life. And as the city lights flickered on outside, Clara understood that some days change us not by force, but by gentleness, not by noise, but by truth, and that a simple day folding laundry had become unforgettable not because it promised perfection, but because it reminded her that even in the quietest moments, life can offer connection, meaning, and the courage to begin again.